Hey crafters, how you doing? Today I'll be showing you how I made this miniature friend's kitchen. Start out by making the cabinets, cut out a rectangle for the base of the cabinets and then 2 pieces for the drawers. Cut and glue some trim directly onto the base to give it the illusion of doors. As you can tell, I'm making a fake kitchen this time, but if you want to make a functional kitchen, you can follow the steps in my previous kitchen tutorial. I'll have it linked in the description and at the end of this video. To make the open cabinet under the sink, I cut out a square and then sketched the outline of the opening using pencil. I then cut it out using an X-acto knife. As you can see, I left some extra space on the left side. This is to be able to glue the 2 cabinet pieces together. Add a fake drawer and then glue it all together. Now it's time to make the sides. Cut out a rectangle and make sure to cut out a space at the bottom for the toe kick. Make one for each side and then glue it in place. I then took 2 strips of wood and glued them to the bottom of the cabinet on the inside to make the toe kick. Now the base of the cabinets are done and it's time for the counter. So the counter had a bit of an odd shape and can be made in 2 pieces or 1 large piece. From what I can tell on the show, it's made with 2 pieces, so that's what I've decided to do. I made 1 rectangle and 1 irregular hexagon and glued them together. Here you can see me testing it out. Don't worry if it's not perfect, we will glue the counters directly to the underside of the countertop and everything will straighten out then. But make sure you don't glue them down yet, as we want to paint and add the sink first. Paint everything blue. I also added a light wood stain to the counters to give them a bit more color. Next we are making the sink. This is an overmount sink, so here I'm making the edges that will go on top of the counters. The back edge is wider so that the faucet will fit over it later. Next, make the sides and glue them flush to the insides of the edges we just made so that there will be some overhang. Add a piece to the bottom, but don't glue it in place just yet. I always like to paint in the drain before gluing it down to make it an easier process. Now cut a hole in the counters to fit the sink. Because this is an overmount sink, this doesn't need to be absolutely perfect as the edges will cover any imperfections. Next, paint the sink white and glue it in place in the countertop. And then glue the countertop to the cabinets. In the show, they've had different counters. The last one was all wood and that's the one I'm making. But the first one was part wood and part tile counters. If you wanted to make that one, then just cover the rectangular piece in the same tiles as the wall. Now it's time to make the iconic shelves. You will need a piece for the base, 3 pieces for the sides and the middle, and 1 piece for the top. Glue them together and add a strip of wood as trim. I added the trim to the top and bottom as well as on the sides. Then add 3 shelves to each side and glue together. Once done, paint it all blue. You might see that some of the clips are out of order. I decided to group them together based on the item instead of jumping back and forth. Next, make the peninsula. Using 2 side pieces, add 3 shelves in between and an extended countertop. I added a thin piece of wood at the bottom, facing away from the kitchen as a toe kick. In the earlier seasons, there is trim going along the bottom of the peninsula, but I'm basing mine on later seasons. Then paint it blue. Time for the walls. I'm starting off with the main wall. I've taken some dense cardboard and sketched out the layout where I want everything to go. Next, take some thin cork sheets and start cutting out rectangles that will be used for bricks. If you've seen my Amsterdam facade video, you know what's coming. Once I've made a bunch, I start gluing them down using glue stick and follow my sketch as a guide. I use the shelves as a guide as I place the bricks to ensure that they are placed as flush as possible. I take 2 thin strips of wood, one thinner than the other, and glue them on top of each other. This will be the trim that goes along the walls. I cut out a piece to use as a guide before continuing to glue down bricks. Once all the bricks are in place, I start gluing down the tiles. I made the tiles using cardstock that I cut into squares, and I continue to use glue stick to glue them in place. Here's what it looks like when it's all glued in place. Make sure that you don't glue down the shelves or the trim just yet. You will need to be able to remove them when we paint later. Next, we are making the wall with the window. As you can see, I've once again sketched out where I want everything to go, but I've also made sure to leave some space on each side to be able to glue all the walls together at the end. I start by making the trim for the window. Using some wood for the base, I then glue a strip of wood to the outside edge of the window trim. I then add a strip of paper for some dimension, and then finish it off with one last strip of wood in the middle. I decided to cut out my window so you can see through it, but you could also paint it or print out a picture and then add the grids on top. I used trim as a guide so I could lay the brick flush against it. When laying the brick, I made sure to match it to the brick on the previous wall so that it would look as seamless as possible. I also added the tiles. Now you can paint the window and frame blue. Once again, don't glue it in place just yet. When working on the third and last wall, I sketched everything out and made sure to match these bricks to the bricks on the wall with the window. To make the yellow cabinet, I used some dense cardboard to make the front, sides, top and bottom, and glue them together. I then added some trim using wood. I glued a thin piece of wood along the inside of the trim to add some detail. As you can see, I've chosen not to close off the top with the trim and instead just let it continue straight up. The reason I did this is because my walls aren't as tall as the cabinet is, so instead of making the cabinet shorter than it is on the show, I've chosen to give it the illusion of being bigger, as if the camera just cuts it off at that point. Then paint it yellow. To make the fridge, I've cut out the shape of the front. I'm then taking a long piece of dense cardboard and gently bending it around the front piece we just made. I made sure to give it a tiny bit of overhang and then glue it to the edges of the front piece. I added a support to the back and sketched out the edge of the fridge and where the silver should go on the front. Taking my X-acto knife, I've created a groove around the door and then painted white. I added a little bit of gloss varnish to the outside to give it a little bit of shine. Time to finish up the walls. Take some wall filler and mix a tiny bit of grey paint to make it the grout. Using a palette knife, I spread the grout between the bricks and used a damp paper towel to remove a little bit and create the slight groove so the grout isn't flush with the bricks. I did eventually switch over to doing that with a palette knife as well instead of the paper towel, but I didn't get it on camera. Here's what it looks like when it's finished. Once it's all dry, it's time to paint. This took a while and I had to paint all the bricks individually. I did a few test runs, and the reason I chose to paint all the bricks individually instead of painting it all and then adding grout over is because the grout picked up the color of the bricks and became red instead. As you can see, the grout also discolors the bricks, so painting them individually was the only way that I could get the desired result. As the show had so many seasons, a lot of things changed on set through the years, so I've had to pick and choose what versions I wanted to make. For example, they've had 3 different fridges, 2 different counters, different handles, different sinks, a different trim on the peninsula, and many more changes. So not every detail is going to be what you remember from the show, but they are true to some point in the show. Then it's time to paint the wall tiles. This will go much quicker as we can just paint over top of all of them instead of painting them individually. The reason we are painting them at all is because the paper and the background are different shades of white, and they can get discolored during the process of gluing them down. So the paint will just give them a more uniform look. Once the paint is dry, paint over it again with a gloss varnish to give it some shine. We can now start gluing everything in place. Start with the wall trim and the shelves on the main wall and the window trim on the middle wall before gluing the 2 walls together. You can then glue down the peninsula. This project took a long time. I ended up cutting, laying down, and hand painting 400 bricks and 274 tiles. To make the curtain under the sink, I made my own pattern on my computer and printed it out. I sprayed some water on the paper before using a pen to shape it the way I wanted. Once done, I glued it on the inside of the cabinet. You can now glue the kitchen cabinet to the walls. I didn't get this on camera, but add glue to the back of the left side piece and along the back of the countertop. Now it's time to finish off the last wall. As you can see, I've already glued the cabinet and the fridge in place. I'm going to start by making the beam. Here are the pieces you will need for the vertical beams that also act as shelves. Here are the main parts of the ceiling beam. Glue them together and fill in one side. Stain all the beams brown. Glue it all together and add a piece of wall behind the beam. Because I realized that you could see a bit of the wall behind the beam, I decided to add some more bricks and make it blend a bit more. Glue it in place and it's time for the finishing touches. I made a handle out of wood and painted it silver for the fridge. Using some silver nail tape, I finished off the edges of the fridge and then glued the handle in place. I made the kitchen faucet by cutting off a piece of dowel, then gluing it on a round piece of wood that I filed down with a nail file. I then glued on a thin piece of wood for the handle, and lastly I filed down a toothpick for the spout. I glued it all onto a rectangular piece of wood as the escutcheon and painted it silver. To be honest, this faucet looks like it belongs more in a bathroom, but it is in fact how it looked on the show, at least at the end of the show. I do have a tutorial for a more traditional kitchen faucet in another video, and I'll link it at the end. Sorry about the weird camera angle, it was a bit tight to film. For the handles on the drawer, I just took a paperclip and then cut it out into 2 equal pieces and bent them slightly before painting them silver. You can also use steel wire or jewelry wire. For the cabinet knobs, I used these tiny nails and wrapped the ends with white clay. I did the same thing for the knobs on my yellow cabinets, but slightly larger, and then added a tiny dot at the end with a fine-tipped black marker. For the final touch, add the oven from my previous video. As they've had different stoves through the years, I decided to reuse the stove from my previous project in this video. It's a bit more modern than the stove they had on the show, but if you wanted to make it more true to the show, you can still follow my tutorial, but make the window smaller and paint the knobs black instead of silver. And we're done! I decided to leave the kitchen empty like the final scene of the show, but if you want me to make a knick-knack video and fill it up in the future, let me know in the comments. I hope you liked this video, let me know in the comments what you thought, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss my next video. I'll be there for you in my next video. Bye!